Alright, so we're back in Maya, and we have, or at least I have, my orange now already made with a shader, and I already have a lighting set up, because I just wanted to really talk about how the shader is set up on this orange. A real quick preview of what that looks like so far. So, in this, this is after like 2 hours worth of working on this whole thing from start to finish, and I'm looking like this. I still want to do one thing to my shader, which is to put a sticker on top of it, and I'm going to use that layered Pixar material to do that. But I want to walk through how I created the current shader, and then I'll put the finishing touch on with my sticker. Really quick overview before we get into that. Just my lighting, dome light with a image from the preset browser. I did technically rotate the sphere so that the main light source is going in towards the front of the orange. That is something you might want to consider when you're using HDRI. I've got my own custom handmade rectangle lights. Not that I really did anything fancy with them, but I decided to not just use a preset and go with that. So I made these from scratch and named them Key, Fill, and Rim. And those are lighting the inside of my little box here. The box, I just cut the front off and I have the edges beveled. And the only other thing to note about the box for now is that it does not cast shadows, so I turned off cast shadows in the render stats on the attribute editor. And I also made it not double-sided, so the inside where the normals are facing is the only side of these polygons rather than the normal double-sided where there's technically a backside. The only other thing that's not shader related is that on my orange, in my attribute editor under the mesh properties, I went to attributes, renderman, and I added a subdiv scheme, which is down here, and that means that if I don't have to hit the 3 key, and it will still render smoothed in the render, which is a nice feature. I did that for the background too. So for the shader, I have it here in my hypershade, and this is not actually the one. I made a regular shader first, and then I recreated it as a layered shader. So in my hypershade, let me graph this. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention. So this is actually something I just discovered. It's very simple, so I don't know how I didn't discover it before. But you can actually have multiple tabs in your node editor or your hypershade here. So I can graph my original orange material in one and have my layered material in the other. Let's get down to brass tacks. So I have my surface shader, which has my displacement map loaded in. Now, the process for loading in this displacement map, all I really did was load the I made a Pixar displace and I loaded that into here, and then into the scalar, which is for a black and white map, which is the normal kind of displacement map. I just have a P texture in here, and this texture image is a 32-bit EXR file that I exported from Mudbox. This is just plugging into the displacement shader for now. I may go back and take a look at that. So this is an important step because that's going to give me most of my surface detail from the sculpt. The normal map will help, but it won't be able to pull its weight by itself. For the actual material, I have a Pixar layer in here, and I'll probably call this something more relevant. Don't want to have bad typing. So that's just what's actually on my orange. I have the mixer, which is automatically applied. That's the whole thing that allows it to even have layers in the first place. So I have a base layer and I have a layer 1. My base layer is called I renamed it Orange Skin because the layer 2 is going to end up being named Sticker. So the orange skin. Now just a quick rundown of what's in here. Diffuse. I have my saved out image from Mudbox, and that texture looks a little bit like this. So this is what I saved out of Mudbox. You can see I have some color in there to artificially darken the top, but otherwise this is just a nice little splotchy orange texture with some little pores and stuff in it and different variations in color. So that's in my diffuse texture. I turned down the diffuse a little tiny bit and I played with the roughness. Of course I had to enable that too because this is a layered shader. Specular, no maps for right now, but I enabled it, turned up edge color. Edge color is what it's going to give us, this glancing angle. You can read that in the pop-up there. So we don't want face color because that would make it look metallic. I played with the roughness in there as well. Now, the new thing, there's two kinds of subsurface scattering. There's the main subsurface, and there's a single scatter. I just went with the single scatter for now, which I would recommend that you do too, just to make it easier. And so I enabled this, turned up the gain, and then I started playing around. So without the single scatter on, we can take a quick render and see what our orange might look like without the subsurface scattering on. So there's that. I just paused while that was rendering. So it's not necessarily a huge difference at first when you interesting. Weird. It's not that much of a difference really at first if you're just glancing at it, but the difference is that the single scatter or the subsurface scattering is going to allow light to penetrate into the surface. So without the subsurface scattering on, it's going to look plastic and kind of have light just bouncing purely off of the surface of the orange. So it's going to just make it look more realistic because just like human skin, fruit skin is going to not completely block out all light. So in class we'll see, and you can try this on your own. If you just hold a flashlight up to your finger, you can see through it basically. You can see light coming through it, and that's because our skin and our body is not completely opaque like we think it might be. And same thing applies for fruit, same thing applies for wax, same thing applies for certain types of like marble and stuff like that, and milk and various other organic products. So we want to try this single scatter on. Now so this is the one with it on. The trick with the subsurface scattering here is that you have to play with the color because by default it's going to be like a white or a beige color, and that's going to make, if I change that, make sure I save this color though in my little inkwell. If I change this to like a really light color and I do a render, I won't let this one render all the way through because we'll see already. Now the color that's going to be underneath the skin, so to speak, is this lighter beige, tan, whitey color. So this obviously is not giving us the effect of it being an orange, a real life orange. It's technically working, but it just does not look accurate to what we'd expect to see. So changing that color is going to be important. So if you're doing a lemon, you should probably make it a dark yellow. If you're making an orange, it should be a dark orange. If you're making a lime, it should be greenish. But you got to play around with it yourself to really understand how it works, because you need to experiment for yourself. The other thing is, by default, the single scatter is at 10. So the mean free path, you can read about this on the RenderMan help docs, but basically that's just how far it's going to go penetrating into the surface in terms of the shader. And the mean free path color is kind of like a secondary scattering color, or after it goes through the main color, what the light is going to come into. This is basically the default actually, but I thought it looked fine for now, so I left it. So turn on single scatter, turn up the gain, and play around with the color and the mean free path when you're making your fruit. And you're also going to be doing this next week for a candle that you're going to make. So for that, we may look at the full subsurface properties. These are actually, it's a little bit different in the main shader where it's not layered, but in the layered version, it looks nearly the same. It's just that there's more settings here. So go with this. But yeah, for your fruit to not look plastic, you need to have this turned on. And that's pretty much it. Oh, one more thing, the normal map. So a normal map is going to, if you haven't seen one already, basically look like this. It's very weird, but since it is so weird, you can't really make it from scratch in Photoshop or anything like that like you can with a bump map. There are plugins and stuff for it, but it was exported out of Mudbox rather. So this is going to kind of complement our displacement map. So this is kind of like a bump map. It's a little bit more robust than a bump map, and that's why it's used a lot in video games that want more detail. But and the other thing is that this doesn't really have to be a high-res image. So this is just a JPEG. It's nothing like an EXR or whatever like our displacement map is. So this is a displacement map. This is a normal map. Weird thing with RenderMan, they have a special node just for normal map. So rather than creating a texture like I made up here, this is just a normal map node. Pro tip for the hypershade: if you just tab, you can start typing in something, and I could create a normal map that way, or I can find it over here in the RenderMan category. It's in here somewhere. I also have this. I don't think I technically need this, but it's kind of an extra control, just called a Pixar Adjust Normal node, which we have the result N from our normal map, and for normal, of course, going into the input normal. Here I can adjust various settings that you can play around with on your own. That just affect the appearance of it, and then that result N goes into the bump normal in the global bump of our layer. Okay, so if you want to go through any of that again, you can just rewind the video. But for my sticker, I'm going to use the second layer. So I better name this. I'll name this orange. Wow, wait, did I spell that? No. Sticker matte. I guess I'm not keeping that naming convention the same, but I'm not concerned with it too much right now. So for this guy, again, all we need to do is really plug in my sticker image for the diffuse, and for that I'm going to try the Pixar texture node again. I want to figure that thing out. So here's my Pixar texture. I'm going to find my sticker diffuse. It's just that, but it's a PNG, so it's important to note that this has transparency in it. You need a PNG or a TIFF or a Targa or something. Load that in, and the other thing is that don't forget the important thing, which is loading in the mask. So without that mask, Oh, I forgot to enable layer 1. I had that disabled before. So yes, make sure your layer is actually enabled. I outsmarted myself when I'm trying to show what not to do. So yeah, now this matte material is just completely covering our orange shader. The orange shader is still technically under there, but we're losing it because of this second layer. So we need to put in our layer 1 mask, we also need to load in that texture. So I'm just gonna, I think I might just use the middle mouse click method. So check this out. Click here, middle mouse click, and drag this over and plop it in there. I'm not sure if that's going to work, actually. Nope, it's not. Okay, well, that's interesting. This is... Oh, let me try the result A. Okay, yeah, that works. So you can still use the Pixar texture node. So result A, so ARGB, so A is alpha. So if I just connect that green to green, layer 1 mask, now that alpha channel for my PNG should be loaded in to the mask for layer 1. Oh yeah. So there's our sticker. And the sticker I just painted on in Mudbox and saved it out. It wasn't really that crazy. I didn't really do much with it. But anyway, so now my sticker is on top of the orange shader, and technically I could go in and like change the specular properties of this. I could add a bump map to this. I could add whatever else maps that I wanted to this. I probably would not want subsurface scattering on that because it's a glossy sticker, so it's not really going to have it. But this is the same thing as putting the label on your pen. It's just that the material underneath is an orange skin, and this material is whatever you need to tweak to make it look like a sticker. I might put a little bit of a bump in there too eventually, so that it is kind of raised off the surface a little bit. Anyway, so I would now just proceed to find a good camera angle to render this from for my final renders. I would also want to go into my render settings, and you could probably just go with a preset of something pretty high, so production high or production denoiser. Now these will take a long time to render, but if you manage your time appropriately, then you should have plenty of time to take a few renders at high quality. Of course, make sure you get it handed in on time either way. But that is what I would do, and I also need to remember to set my render size back to HD. And then I'm ready to go. Oh, there's one last thing. There's two things I forgot that I just remembered. One is that when you are putting in your images, if you're using the Pixar texture, I noticed that I was having an issue with this. You might want to turn on the linearize. So if you were just putting in, if you just read this pop up on your own computer, you can read it yourself. But basically, we're putting in an sRGB image, and the way that RenderMan works, it wants it to be a raw image. So this is basically just converting it back to a raw image by checking this on. So I would want that on for my orange skin. Oh, that was the wrong window, but I'd want that on for my orange skin, and I want that on for my sticker. Now I don't really need it for the normal map. In fact, the normal map's a different node, so it doesn't even have that option, but I definitely want it for the normal map. And I do not need it for my displacement map. So the displacement map, technically I can turn it on, but an EXR is already a linear image to begin with. So, you know, I don't, as far as I'm concerned, or at least as far as I know, that does not need to be turned on. Cool. So yeah, displacement map goes into here. Don't forget that part. All right. So that's pretty much for that. I already forgot. Oh, right. The last thing is to create multiple oranges. You may want to make them instances. So I went into duplicate special. I'm going to change this geometry type to instance. And I'm going to just see what happens if I do this. I'm not sure what Smart Transform does. Apparently nothing. Interesting. Let me undo that. Weird. Hold on. Be an instance. There we go. So now I have copies, but since they're instances, they're like actual, not real geometry, so to speak. They're just kind of placeholders, and they're automatically going to have the right material and stuff applied to them. So now I could kind of set up my little bunch of oranges in a way that looks cool, or at least looks visually appealing. So it would be a good thing to do for your group bunch of fruit render that you technically need to do as part of your assignment and submission, is to render a bunch of fruit. And a bunch can be kind of as much as you feel like it needs to be. But if you do an instance, it will be a little bit lighter on your Maya and lighter on your scene size than if they're just actual copies. And you also don't have to worry about any of this stuff down at the bottom about duplicating the input graph or blah, 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 blah. So make instances and it should be fine. This might just have to clip through a little bit for the sake of art. Anyway, so I won't render this now because I would literally be sitting here for like an hour waiting for it to finish, but that is how you should approach your fruit shader, going all the way from Maya to Mudbox, and then back into Maya again at the end. All right, see ya.